Shadows of Ravensmoor Manor, Part 1. Chapter 1, The Inheritance of Shadows. The sky hung low with storm-heavy clouds as Marcus Caldwell stood before the iron gates of Ravensmoor Manor. His breath was slow, measured, but deep inside, a restless unease coiled within him. The estate stretched before him like a forgotten relic of time, its towering spires and gabled rooftops blackened by years of neglect. A heavy mist curled around the ground, whispering through the withered hedges that once framed a grand entrance. The letter had arrived at his university 3 weeks prior, an elegantly penned missive sealed with the crest of the Ravensmoor lineage. Marcus had never expected to inherit anything, let alone an estate with a sinister reputation. His great-uncle, Lord William Ravensmoor, had passed under mysterious circumstances, and Marcus, as the last living descendant, had been summoned to claim his birthright. As a professor of ancient myths and legends, Marcus had spent his life debunking folklore, unraveling the truths hidden within the grand epics of history. But standing before the looming Gothic behemoth of Ravensmoor Manor, he couldn't shake the feeling that this time, the legends might be real. He exhaled and pushed open the heavy gates. They groaned in protest, rusted from time and abandonment, and he strode forward. The manor's doors were already ajar, waiting for him, and as he stepped inside, a gust of cold air slithered past him, carrying the faint scent of old parchment, wax, and something decayed. The grand foyer was illuminated by a dying chandelier, its weak light barely reaching the vaulted ceiling. Tattered portraits lined the walls, their subjects watching him with hollow eyes. The floorboards creaked under his polished shoes as he moved deeper inside, feeling the oppressive weight of history settle upon him. A woman's whisper carried through the stillness. "Marcus." He turned sharply, scanning the dim corridor, but there was no one there. Just the flickering of candlelight against the damp stone walls. His fingers brushed over the letter in his pocket, the words still burned into his mind. "Beware the whispers of Ravensmoor, for some who speak do not wish to be heard. There are shadows that wake when the heir returns, and she is waiting." A sharp gust of wind surged through the hallway, extinguishing the candles one by one, plunging the room into near darkness. Marcus stilled, his breath catching in his throat. Then, as if summoned from the past itself, she appeared. A figure materialized at the base of the grand staircase, a woman, bathed in the cold glow of the moonlight spilling through the stained glass windows. Her form was delicate, her gown a flowing cascade of translucent white, shimmering as though woven from moonbeams. Her eyes, large and luminous, held a sadness that transcended time. She wasn't human. Marcus had spent years studying apparitions in folklore, but this was no legend. This was real. His pulse quickened as he took a hesitant step forward. "Who are you?" The woman's lips parted, and her voice was like a memory just on the edge of recall. "I am Amanda." The moment the name left her lips, a violent force ripped through the manor. The walls shook, the chandelier groaned on its chain, and the very air crackled with unseen power. Marcus stumbled, gripping a nearby column as a spectral whispering chorus filled the room, voices overlapping in a desperate, fragmented symphony. He must not know, he must not remember, she must not return. Amanda's ethereal form flickered, pain flashing across her ghostly features. "They know you're here," she whispered urgently. "They know why you've come." The air grew thick, pressing down on him, urging him to turn back, to leave this cursed place behind. But Marcus wasn't one to turn from mysteries. He had spent his life searching for answers, and now, for the first time, the mystery had found him. He met Amanda's gaze, determination hardening in his chest. "Then let them know I will not leave until I uncover the truth." The manor shuddered in response, and somewhere deep in the corridors, a door that had been locked for centuries slowly creaked open. Chapter 2, The Unveiling. The creaking of the ancient door echoed through the dimly lit corridor, a low groan of wood and rusted hinges protesting against movement after years of stillness. Marcus swallowed, his throat dry as he stepped toward the gaping entrance, the scent of damp stone and old parchment thick in the air. Beyond the threshold, the unknown awaited. Amanda's translucent form flickered beside him, her luminous eyes darting toward the shadows stretching into the chamber. She was ethereal, untethered, yet something about the moment made her presence feel more tangible than before. The tremor in her whisper betrayed unease. This room was never meant to be opened. Marcus hesitated. He had spent years immersed in ancient texts, deciphering the warnings of forgotten civilizations. And yet, standing at the precipice of something undeniably real, the weight of it pressed against his chest. He inhaled deeply, willing his analytical mind to take over. He was here to uncover the truth, to understand what had been buried beneath layers of mystery and shadow. He stepped inside. Dust curled up from the floor, disturbed for the first time in centuries. The room was cavernous, its high ceiling disappearing into darkness. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with brittle tomes bound in cracked leather. An elaborate wooden desk, covered in aged scrolls and scattered papers, stood at the center, its surface illuminated by a single candle, burning, as if it had been lit just moments before. Marcus's breath hitched. The air in the chamber was thick, charged with something unseen but undeniable. Amanda moved beside him, her presence casting a chill over his skin. This was Lord Ravensmoor's study, she murmured, her gaze locked on the bookshelves. The last place he was seen before. She trailed off, her expression clouded by something unspoken. Marcus turned to her, studying the way her form flickered, caught between presence and absence. He wanted to ask what she remembered, what she knew, but before he could speak, something shifted. A whisper curled through the air. Not Amanda's. Marcus stiffened. The whisper grew, like parchment crumbling in unseen hands, a chorus of voices weaving together in a hushed symphony. Amanda's fingers curled at her sides. They are watching. Marcus's gaze flicked toward the bookshelves. The candlelight wavered, casting long, distorted shadows that slithered across the floor, bending in ways that defied logic. Then, he saw it. A single book, shifting on the shelf. Moving on its own. His pulse quickened. He reached forward, hesitating for only a moment before pulling the tome free. The whispering stopped. The shadows came alive. Chapter 3, The Whispering Walls. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus's fingers trembled against the ancient tome, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. The book's spine cracked faintly as he turned it over in his hands, the embossed lettering worn by time. The Doctrine of Eternal Souls. The moment he read the words aloud, Amanda shuddered, the candlelight flickering violently as though something unseen had stirred at the sound. Put it back, she whispered urgently. We shouldn't be in here. Marcus, ever the scholar, was not one to yield to fear. If anything, the mystery beckoned him forward. This book, he murmured, flipping open the brittle pages. If Lord Ravensmoor was researching this, he wasn't just dabbling in superstition. He was trying to. A thud echoed from behind them. Both he and Amanda froze. The bookcases, lined with forgotten histories and dust-ridden parchment, seemed to shift, or breathe. The shadows along the edges of the room elongated, stretching toward them like grasping fingers. Marcus stepped back, his pulse hammering against his ribs. Amanda's form flickered as she turned sharply, eyes scanning the dim study. Something doesn't want us to read that, she murmured. As if in response, a long, slow scraping sound filled the room. Marcus turned his head toward the farthest bookcase, just in time to see it inch forward, revealing a sliver of utter darkness behind it. A secret passage. His academic mind warred with instinct. Every story, every record, every folktale he had studied warned against following the unknown. But Marcus had spent his life chasing the past, unraveling truths buried beneath legend. He stepped toward the opening, barely aware of Amanda reaching for him, her fingers passing through his arm like mist. No, she urged. You don't understand. The house isn't just haunted, it remembers. Marcus ignored the chill in her voice, pulling a candle from the desk and stepping toward the darkened passage. The corridor beyond was narrow, lined with stone walls etched in symbols, glyphs, he realized, resembling ancient sigils of binding and protection. But protection from what? Amanda hesitated before following. I died in this house, she whispered, but even I have never been in there. Marcus felt a chill settle at the base of his spine. He pressed onward. The air inside the passage was different, denser, charged with something old and unseen. The further they ventured, the colder it became, their breath visible in the flickering candlelight. At the end of the corridor, a door loomed, carved with intricate sigils matching those along the walls. Marcus reached for the handle. Slam. The door threw itself open. Beyond, an enormous chamber unfolded before them. It was nothing like the rest of the manor. This room was untouched by time. The ceiling arched high above, its beams draped with tattered banners bearing the Ravensmoor crest. The walls were lined with towering bookshelves, each shelf meticulously organized. But the most unnerving detail was the stone altar at the center of the room, its surface carved with deep grooves, as though something had once been placed, or sacrificed, upon it. Amanda gasped. This was his ritual chamber. Marcus set the book down on the altar, scanning the room with a mixture of fascination and unease. Ravensmoor Manor had been hiding something far darker than whispers. His great-uncle hadn't just believed in the occult. He had practiced it. A whisper slithered through the air, low and indecipherable. Marcus turned just as something moved in the corner of his vision. A shadow detached itself from the farthest bookshelf. It wasn't a trick of the candlelight. It was a man. Tall, draped in dark robes, his face obscured beneath a heavy hood. The figure did not move like a ghost, it was solid, purposeful. Amanda shrank back, her expression stark with recognition. Marcus, she breathed, that's. The figure lifted its head. And where there should have been eyes, there was only hollow darkness. The candle snuffed out. And the chamber erupted into chaos. Chapter 4, The Haunting Ritual. The chamber quaked with the chaos unleashed. In the sudden darkness, Marcus and Amanda struggled to regain their bearings as the flickering candlelight sputtered out one by one. The huddled group of ancient tomes and meticulously arranged shelves now loomed as silent sentinels of secrets long buried. Shadows writhed like living things, and an otherworldly chill seeped through the stone floor. Marcus's heart hammered as he tried to steady his trembling hand on the altar where the ancient book lay forgotten for the moment. The whisper that had led them here, a soft, indistinguishable murmur, now rose to a crescendo, echoing off the high, tattered beams of the ceiling. It was a language older than time, a haunting incantation that vibrated through every crack in the ancient walls. Then, from the corner where the shadow man had appeared, the figure moved again. It advanced slowly, each step measured and deliberate, its dark robe swirling like smoke around its form. In the brief moments when the candlelight returned, whether by a stray flicker or the will of the manor, the figure's hollow void where eyes should have been seemed to pulsate with an ominous energy. Amanda shrank back, fear etched on her face, while Marcus's academic curiosity warred with the instinct to flee. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, his voice echoing in the void. The figure paused, and for a heartbeat, the silence stretched as if the manor itself was holding its breath. Then, in a voice that resonated with both menace and ancient sorrow, it answered, "I am the keeper of the ritual, the remnant of a legacy that should have died with the old Ravensmoor blood. I have long watched over these secrets." The words sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. He could feel the power in that declaration, an energy so potent it threatened to tear through the fabric of reality itself. The figure raised a gaunt, shadowed hand toward the altar, and the symbols carved into its surface began to glow with a sickly, pulsating light. The ancient book, lying forgotten, trembled as if stirred by an unseen force. Amanda's voice came out as a broken whisper, "This is what he practiced, the rituals that cursed the manor." Marcus took a cautious step forward, drawn by the thirst for knowledge that had defined his career, even as every instinct screamed to run. "Tell me," he demanded, "what was the ritual? What did Lord Ravensmoor seek to achieve?" The keeper's eyes, or rather, the void where they should be, seemed to narrow. He sought eternal life, and power beyond mortal ken. In his arrogance, he bound the souls of his kin to this very manor, sacrificing not only their mortality but their freedom. Every ritual, every incantation whispered in these halls was meant to keep the darkness at bay, or to call it forth. A heavy silence settled over the chamber. The illuminated glyphs on the altar now swirled like chaotic brushstrokes across the stone, painting images of blood and loss, of forbidden magic and desperate bargains. The power coursing through the room was almost tangible, each heartbeat of the light echoing the pain of those long sacrificed. Marcus's mind raced with possibilities and warnings, his scholarly passion ignited by the sheer rawness of the truth. "And what of the ritual's price?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "What must be sacrificed to bind this darkness, or to banish it?" The keeper's form wavered, and in that wavering, a single word was uttered, as if spoken by the very soul of the manor: blood. At that, Amanda gasped, her eyes wide with horror and recognition. "It must be done in blood, my blood," she whispered, as if the truth had been hidden deep within her all along. Marcus felt the weight of her words like a crushing blow. The realization that the very essence of life, and perhaps love, might be the key to breaking the curse, or binding it forever, left him reeling. "Then we have no choice," he said, his tone resolute even as his heart pounded with dread. The keeper's voice lowered to a near sibilant murmur. "The ritual is ancient. It requires not only blood, but a true offering of one's soul, a sacrifice that balances the scales between life and death. Only then can the curse be undone, or sealed for eternity." The candlelight returned in sporadic bursts, casting grotesque, shifting shadows across the walls as the chamber seemed to pulse with the very heartbeat of Ravensmoor Manor. Every creak and groan of the building added to the cacophony of ancient despair. Amanda stepped forward, her eyes glistening with determination and sorrow. "Marcus, I will do what is needed," she murmured, voice barely audible over the rising chorus of unseen whispers. Marcus reached out to her, torn between his duty as a scholar and his love for this spectral woman who embodied the tragic past of the manor. "Amanda, no one should have to," he began, but the keeper cut him off with a single, resonant command. "The price must be paid. The ritual must be completed." In that moment, the altar's glow intensified, and the symbols began to shift, forming a complex diagram that danced with ominous promise. Marcus knew, with an unyielding certainty, that the path ahead was fraught with peril and heartbreak. The secrets of Ravensmoor Manor were clawing their way into the present, demanding to be acknowledged, and possibly undone. As the chamber's walls echoed with the whispered voices of the past, and the ancient clock of fate ticked ever closer to midnight, Marcus and Amanda stood at the precipice of an unfathomable decision. The darkness of the manor, the legacy of cursed rituals, and the promise of a future unburdened by endless sorrow converged in that single, heavy moment. Marcus's eyes met Amanda's, and in that silent exchange, they both knew that their journey had irrevocably changed. There was no turning back from the depths they were about to confront. The ritual, his research, her sacrifice, and their shared hope, was their only chance to break the curse of Ravensmoor Manor, or to be forever consumed by it. And as the keeper's haunting words faded into the oppressive silence, the true test of their hearts, their love, and their resolve began. The ritual was about to commence. Chapter 5, The Bloodbound Pact. The air inside the ritual chamber had changed. Where once there had been a suffocating stillness, now it pulsed with an almost sentient awareness. The candle flames flickered in unnatural rhythms, bending toward the altar as if drawn by an unseen force. Marcus's breathing was uneven, his heart pounding against his ribs as he processed the keeper's words. The price must be paid. The ritual must be completed. Amanda stood at his side, her ghostly form more solid than he had ever seen before. Her translucent skin seemed to glow in the dim light, her expression unreadable. But he could sense it, the fear, the hesitation. And yet, buried beneath it, was something else. Acceptance. She had always known. Marcus clenched his fists. There must be another way. The keeper's shadowed face tilted ever so slightly, the absence of eyes an even deeper void in the wavering light. There is not. A chill ran through Marcus. He had spent his life unraveling myths and legends, dissecting the fantastical and revealing the mundane truths beneath them. But there was nothing mundane about this. This was real. And he had been drawn into something far older, far darker than he had ever imagined. Amanda turned to him. "Marcus." I don't want to be trapped here anymore. His throat tightened. You won't be. I swear I will find a way. She shook her head. This is the way. The altar between them glowed brighter, the glyphs shifting like liquid silver beneath the candlelight. The doctrine of eternal souls lay open upon the stone surface, its ancient pages whispering against the still air. The text was written in an archaic script, one Marcus could barely recognize, let alone decipher. Amanda reached out, her fingers hovering above the book. The answer is here. Marcus hesitated before stepping closer. The moment his fingertips touched the page, a shock of cold shot through his veins, as if the very ink bled with spectral energy. He struggled to make sense of the text, but the symbols twisted, reforming into something he could suddenly understand. The bloodbound pact. He swallowed hard as the words formed in his mind. A ritual to restore a soul to the living realm. He skimmed the passages, his breath catching at the price required. Blood willingly given by one who loves the lost. His pulse thundered in his ears. It requires a sacrifice, Amanda finished softly. But it doesn't mean death. The keeper watched them in silence, unmoving as the chamber darkened around them. The candlelight dimmed, swallowed by encroaching shadows. Marcus licked his lips, his mind racing. The ritual doesn't demand a life, only a binding of fates. He met Amanda's gaze, seeing the uncertainty in her eyes. It's possible to bring you back, Amanda. But it means we will be bound together. Our souls entwined. She inhaled sharply, as if the very idea filled her with equal parts hope and terror. The weight of it all settled over him like a lead cloak. This wasn't just about breaking a curse or solving an ancient mystery anymore. It was about her. About them. Amanda's hands trembled as she reached for his. For the first time, when her fingers brushed against his skin, he felt her, truly felt the cold press of her presence, no longer just air, but something tangible. Something real. The altar pulsed. The book's pages turned on their own. Marcus's breath hitched. If we do this, there's no turning back. Amanda's eyes glistened. I've already turned back too many times. A sudden gust of wind ripped through the chamber, sending the candles flickering violently. The keeper raised his arms, his shadow elongating across the room. The time has come, he intoned. The pact must be sealed. Marcus stepped forward, his hands tightening around Amanda's. A thin, spectral thread of silver energy now connected them, stretching from her chest to his. The bond had already begun to form. The altar's carvings shifted, forming a circle around them. The doctrine of eternal souls glowed with an unnatural light, the text bleeding into the stone itself. The symbols swirled and danced, forming a single, powerful command. Speak the vow. Seal the bond. Offer your blood. Marcus swallowed hard, lifting his gaze to Amanda's. Are you ready? She nodded, her grip tightening. Together, they spoke the words as one, voices merging with the pulse of the manor itself. The chamber shuddered, the very foundation trembling beneath the force of the binding spell. The glyphs carved into the stone flared brightly, then turned crimson. A single drop of blood from Marcus's hand fell onto the altar. The room exploded with light. Amanda gasped, her form flickering wildly as if caught between two realities. Her hands clutched his, desperation flaring in her luminous eyes as the ritual pulled at her, reeling her toward something unknown. Marcus held on, refusing to let go. Amanda! She cried out as an invisible force yanked her forward. And then, suddenly, everything stilled. The air settled. The glyphs dimmed. The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda collapsed against him, her body solid, warm, alive. She was breathing. Marcus stared at her, hardly daring to believe what had happened. Her skin was no longer spectral, no longer cold. She was here, in his arms, human once more. The keeper's voice echoed in the distance, the words barely a whisper. The bond is forged. Amanda looked up at Marcus, tears brimming in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. But before he could respond, the shadows in the room stirred. The ritual was complete, but something else had awoken in the process. And it was watching. Chapter 6: The Awakening. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. The ritual had worked, Amanda was alive, flesh and blood against Marcus's trembling hands, but the air around them shifted, charged with something unnatural. Marcus barely had time to exhale before a wave of oppressive energy rolled through the chamber, seeping into the very walls of the manor. The candlelight flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that twisted and moved of their own accord. The sensation of being watched, closely, hungrily, was unmistakable. Amanda clung to him, her breath ragged. "Something's wrong." Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He could feel it, the very air hummed with unseen forces, a presence that had been dormant for centuries now stirring awake. The keeper had said the bond was forged, but he had failed to warn them that the act of binding would come at a greater cost. A deep, guttural groan echoed from the stone walls. A sound not of this world. Then, a whisper. Low, curling, ancient. Amanda shuddered, turning toward the darkness at the far end of the chamber. "Marcus," she whispered, gripping his hand tighter. "We woke something up." The whispering grew, overlapping voices, murmuring in tongues neither of them recognized. The air grew thick with a sensation Marcus could only describe as malice. And then the shadows moved. At first, it was subtle, like the flickering of candlelight casting odd silhouettes. But then they elongated, stretched, slithering toward the floor like liquid darkness. Something stepped forward. Marcus's breath hitched as a figure emerged from the shifting black. It was tall, inhumanly so, its limbs long, too long, moving with a slow, unnatural grace. Its face was obscured beneath the void of a hood, a silhouette with no true form, and yet the mere presence of it sent cold dread sinking into Marcus's bones. Amanda stumbled back, pressing against him. "That wasn't here before." The thing lifted its head, though it had no discernible features. Marcus felt its gaze settle on him. It exuded power, something much older than the manor itself, something that had slept beneath Ravensmoor for centuries, waiting. It had awoken because of them. The keeper's voice rose in Marcus's memory. "The bond is forged. But at what cost?" Amanda's fingers dug into Marcus's arm, her own breath ragged. "What do we do?" Marcus fought to steady himself. His logical mind screamed for reason, for a way to analyze what was happening, but there was nothing logical about this. The ritual had been performed, the blood had been given. They had brought Amanda back, but in doing so, they had upset the balance. The entity took a step forward. The very ground beneath them shuddered, as if the manor itself recoiled from the thing's presence. Then, the whispering turned to words. "You were warned." The voice did not belong to a single being. It was many, overlapping tones, some low and guttural, others high and brittle. Amanda gasped. "Marcus, it knows us." He didn't doubt it. "Who are you?" he demanded, stepping protectively in front of her. The shadows pulsed. The presence smiled. The true master of Ravensmoor. Marcus's stomach dropped. This was no lingering spectre. This was no fractured soul, bound to the manor's walls by unfinished business. This was something older. Stronger. Hungrier. It had been waiting for them. Amanda's hand tightened around his. Her voice was barely a whisper. "We need to get out of here." Marcus's mind raced. They had triggered something, the ritual had not gone unnoticed, and this thing had no intention of letting them simply walk away. A deep, slow rumble filled the chamber, the walls vibrating as if struggling to contain the entity's sheer presence. The room darkened further, shadows creeping toward them like ink spilling through water. Marcus took a slow step back. "Amanda, when I say run." The entity moved. It wasn't walking, wasn't gliding, it was simply there, shifting through space as if distance meant nothing. One moment it was by the altar, the next it was right before them. The shadows erupted. Marcus grabbed Amanda's hand and ran. The moment their feet crossed the threshold of the chamber, the manor reacted. The walls warped, doors that had once been open now slammed shut behind them, corridors shifting as if the house itself sought to trap them within its grasp. A sound followed them, the whispering, growing louder, more insistent, the voice of the entity merging with the very foundations of Ravensmoor Manor. "You are bound to this place now. You cannot leave." Marcus pulled Amanda through the winding passageways, his breath burning in his lungs. They had to reach the main hall, had to escape before the house twisted itself into a new prison around them. Amanda glanced over her shoulder and screamed. The shadowed figure was right behind them, moving unnaturally, not bound by the constraints of walls or logic. It was part of the manor. Marcus didn't stop running. They needed to reach the light. Up ahead, the entrance to the great hall loomed, if they could just make it past the threshold, past the last barrier of the ritual chamber's influence. They crossed into the hall. And the doors slammed shut behind them. Silence. Amanda collapsed against the nearest column, clutching her chest. Marcus braced himself against the cold stone wall, forcing air back into his lungs. The entity had not followed. It was bound to the ritual chamber. For now. The house groaned, as if displeased with their escape. The candlelight of the great hall flickered back to life, but the oppressive presence had not left. Amanda turned to Marcus, her expression one of pure horror. "Marcus, what have we done?" He had no answer. But he knew one thing with certainty. The ritual had worked. Amanda was alive. But something else was awake now, too. Chapter 7, The Manor's Grasp. The silence that followed their escape was as heavy as the storm-laden sky outside. The great hall was dimly lit, the grand chandelier overhead barely swaying as if even the air itself had stilled in anticipation. Marcus pressed a hand to his chest, trying to steady his racing heart, while Amanda clung to the nearby column, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The manor had let them go, but only just. Something in the very walls of Ravensmoor had shifted, the balance of power disrupted by the ritual. Amanda was alive, restored in flesh and blood, but they had awoken something far worse in return. The entity that had lurked in the depths of the house, bound by ancient rites, was no longer passive. And it had recognized them. Amanda turned to him, her newly warm skin pale in the flickering candlelight. "It spoke to us, Marcus. It knows who we are." He nodded, swallowing down the lump of dread in his throat. "And it knows what we did." They had barely made it out of the ritual chamber alive. The shadow being, the so-called master of Ravensmoor, had moved unlike anything human, bending time and space to its will. The way it had shifted through the walls, its voice layered with the whispers of many, sent ice through Marcus's veins. For a moment, he had felt as though they had been standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable, something hungry. Amanda shivered and hugged her arms. "What now?" Marcus forced his mind to focus. He was a scholar, an academic. He had spent years deciphering the cryptic messages of lost civilizations and unraveling the meanings behind forbidden texts. This was no different. Except this time, he was inside the legend. He took a breath and looked around the grand hall, taking in the intricate carvings on the dark wooden walls, the vast oil paintings that loomed overhead, and the countless locked doors that lined the corridors leading deeper into the manor. If Ravensmoor had secrets, they would be hidden in its oldest places. "We need answers," he said finally. "The keeper said the ritual would forge a bond, but he never told us what that meant for you, or for me." Amanda nodded. "And what about that thing? If it was locked away, why has it been watching us this whole time? Why is it still here?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I don't know. But I intend to find out." The house seemed to exhale, a draft sweeping through the hall, causing the chandeliers to flicker. A soft, barely perceptible click echoed in the silence. A door had unlocked itself. Marcus and Amanda both turned toward the sound, their gazes landing on a narrow passageway at the farthest end of the hall. The door, once sealed by time and disuse, now stood slightly ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. Amanda inhaled sharply. That wasn't open before. Marcus nodded. It's leading us somewhere. His gut told him this wasn't an invitation, it was a test. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away, to leave the house and never return, but that wasn't an option anymore. He and Amanda had tied themselves to Ravensmoor, and whatever waited in the darkness beyond that door held the answers they needed. He reached into his coat, withdrawing the small oil lantern he had tucked away earlier. With a quick flick, the wick caught fire, casting a warm glow against the cold stone walls. Amanda stepped closer, her fingers curling around his wrist. If we do this, we do it together. Marcus met her gaze. She was afraid, rightfully so, but there was something else beneath it, determination. This house had taken her life once. She wouldn't let it take anything more. He nodded. Together. With that, they stepped into the unknown. The passage was narrow, lined with old brick and damp with the scent of mildew. The air was noticeably colder here, thick with the presence of something unseen. Their footsteps echoed as they moved deeper, the corridor twisting and turning in unnatural ways, as if the house itself was shifting around them. Marcus kept his lantern steady, his eyes scanning the walls. Faint markings had been etched into the stone, almost imperceptible, but there. Glyphs. Sigils of binding. Amanda, he whispered, gesturing to the symbols. These were meant to seal something in. Her expression darkened. Then why is the path still open? Before Marcus could answer, they reached the end of the passage, an arched doorway leading into a vast chamber beyond. The walls were lined with tall wooden shelves, overflowing with ancient tomes and decayed manuscripts. In the center of the room, atop a massive oak desk, sat a black leather-bound book, its cover stamped with Ravensmoor's family crest. Amanda sucked in a breath. Is that? Marcus's heart pounded. Lord Ravensmoor's personal journal. This was it. The answers they sought, the truth behind the manor's darkness, the rituals, the entity still haunting them, could all be within these pages. He reached forward, fingers trembling slightly as he opened the book. The moment he did, the candles in the chamber flared violently, their flames stretching unnaturally high. A sudden gust of wind surged through the room, flipping the pages on their own, revealing hastily scrawled passages written in a desperate hand. Marcus's breath caught as he read the first entry. I have made a grave mistake. The ritual was never meant to be completed. It does not bind the soul, it feeds something older, something buried beneath this house. And now, it is watching me. Amanda's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus turned another page, his stomach twisting as the inked words seemed to shake beneath his fingertips. I am not alone in this house. I hear it in the walls. It knows me. It calls me by name. The lantern flickered. A shadow moved at the edge of the room. And then, right before their eyes, the ink on the final page began to change, reforming itself into fresh words, words that had not been written by any hand, but were appearing of their own will. Marcus's blood ran cold as the new words took shape. You should not have come here, Marcus Caldwell. Now, it knows you too. Amanda grabbed his arm, her voice a choked whisper. Marcus, it's talking to you. A low, echoing laugh rumbled from the walls around them. And then, the door slammed shut.
Every story has an ending, but some mysteries live on. If you enjoyed this tale, don't let it fade into the shadows. Smash that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories that will transport you beyond the veil of the ordinary. Subscribe to our channel and your name will appear at the beginning of our next video, where we will pleasantly thank you for your subscribing. Tap the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the unknown. Share your thoughts in the comments. What twists did you see coming? And what secrets do you think still remain? Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and let the next story begin.